The Zephyrian High Command had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. Their massive ships cast shadows over 100 worlds, and their blue-skinned warriors were known throughout the stars as unstoppable. They had conquered the fierce Kralik warriors, enslaved the technologically advanced Vortons, and crushed the rebellious Nades Federation. Every species that dared to resist had eventually knelt before the might of the Empire. But humans were different. The Zephyrians had heard whispers about these strange creatures from a small blue planet in the Outer Rim. Reports said humans were weak, divided, and constantly fighting among themselves. Their technology was primitive, their ships barely capable of interstellar travel. Most importantly, intelligence reports claimed that humans were peaceful by nature and feared war. Admiral Vex Taylor sat in his command chair aboard the flagship Crimson Talon, studying the data about Earth. The planet had only recently achieved faster-than-light communication and had sent peaceful messages to nearby systems. Their first contact protocol spoke of trade, cultural exchange, and diplomatic relations. They had even included mathematical equations and artistic displays to show their peaceful intentions. Pathetic, Vex Taylor muttered, his 4 eyes scanning the reports. They fear conflict so much they try to make friends before they even meet us. His second-in-command, Captain Zek Morin, approached with additional intelligence. Admiral, our scouts confirm the human military is scattered across their planet in small groups. They have no unified space fleet, no orbital defenses worth mentioning. Their largest weapons are what they call nuclear missiles, crude explosive devices that would barely scratch our hull plating. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in amusement. How many ships will we need for their conquest? 10 vessels should be more than sufficient, Admiral. Perhaps 5. Vex Taylor stood from his chair, his imposing figure casting a shadow across the bridge. At nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 powerful arms and natural armor plating, he was a typical Zephyrian warrior. His species had evolved from predators on a harsh world where only the strongest survived. War was in their blood, violence was their art, and conquest was their purpose. We'll take 20 ships, he decided. I want this to be quick and decisive. The humans must learn their place in our empire without any foolish ideas about resistance. As the Zephyrian fleet moved toward Earth, they intercepted more human transmissions. The messages were filled with hope and excitement about meeting other intelligent life. Human leaders spoke about the potential for galactic peace and cooperation. They discussed sharing technology, culture, and knowledge. Not once did the transmissions mention military preparation or defensive strategies. The Zephyrians laughed among themselves. In 3,000 years of conquest, they had never encountered a species so naive. Most civilizations at least tried to appear strong during first contact. They would demonstrate their weapons, show off their fleets, or make bold declarations about defending their worlds. But humans seemed genuinely excited to make new friends among the stars. Captain Zek Morin brought the Admiral a translation of Earth's latest message. To our new galactic neighbors, we extend our warmest greetings and hopes for peaceful relations. We have prepared gifts of our art, music, and scientific knowledge to share with you. We hope this marks the beginning of a beautiful friendship among the stars. Gifts, Admiral Vex Taylor noted. They want to give us presents like children meeting their elders. This will be the easiest conquest in Imperial history. The fleet continued its approach to the Sol system, confident in their superior numbers and technology. Their ships were armed with plasma cannons that could level mountains, shields that could deflect any known weapon, and armor forged from the strongest metals in the galaxy. Each vessel carried enough firepower to subjugate an entire world. But there was something the Zephyrians didn't know about humans. Something their intelligence reports had missed completely. Yes, humans could be peaceful and diplomatic when they chose to be. Yes, they preferred trade and cooperation to conflict. But humans had spent their entire evolutionary history as persistent hunters, tracking prey across vast distances with single-minded determination. They had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars against their own species. They had learned to adapt, to improvise, and to never give up. Most importantly, humans had produced individuals who could remain perfectly still for hours, control their breathing to a whisper, and kill with a single shot from impossible distances. They called these individuals snipers, and they were about to give the Zephyrian Empire the shock of its 3,000-year existence. On Earth, military leaders were not as naive as their public transmission suggested. While diplomats spoke of peace and friendship, generals quietly prepared for the worst. They had studied the few images of Zephyrian ships captured by long-range telescopes. They had analyzed the energy signatures and estimated the technological gap between human and alien civilizations. The conclusion was sobering. In a direct military confrontation, humanity would lose badly. Human ships were slower, their weapons weaker, their shields almost non-existent compared to Zephyrian technology. But human military doctrine had always emphasized that winning wasn't about having the best equipment. It was about using what you had in the smartest possible way. In a secure bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Sarah Chun reviewed the defensive plans. "We can't match their technology," she told her staff. "But we don't need to. We just need to make them pay a price they're not willing to pay." Unknown to the approaching Zephyrian fleet, Earth's best marksmen were already taking their positions. Marcus Reed had been many things in his 34 years of life. A farm boy from Montana, a Marine Corps Scout sniper, a veteran of 3 conflicts, and now Earth's last hope. He lay perfectly still among the rocky outcrops of the Australian outback, his rifle trained on the empty sky above. Beside him, his spotter, Jake, whispered wind calculations and distance estimates into his earpiece. "Contact in T-minus 40 minutes, came the voice through their encrypted channel. All ghost units confirm positions. Around the globe, 47 of Earth's most skilled snipers reported in from their hidden positions. They were scattered across 7 continents, each one carefully chosen for their ability to remain undetected and make impossible shots. The plan was insane by any military standard, but it was the only chance humanity had. The Zephyrian fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system with typical Imperial arrogance. 20 massive warships arranged themselves in a perfect formation, their hulls gleaming silver against the black of space. Admiral Vex Taylor stood on his bridge, admiring the primitive blue world that would soon bow before his might. "Begin the standard conquest protocol," he ordered. "Target their major population centers and prepare for orbital bombardment." Captain Zek Morin activated the communication array. "Attention, primitive humans of the 3rd planet. I am Captain Zek Morin of the Zephyrian Empire. You will surrender unconditionally and submit to Imperial rule. You have 1 of your hours to comply, or we will demonstrate the consequences of resistance." On Earth, world leaders gathered in emergency sessions while their military commanders executed the most desperate plan in human history. The snipers had been positioned not to shoot at the ships in space. That would be impossible, but to wait for the inevitable landing parties that would come to secure strategic locations. Marcus adjusted his scope and controlled his breathing. His target zone was Uluru, the massive rock formation that intelligence suggested would appeal to the aliens as a landing site for their command post. The Zephyrians would want somewhere visible and symbolically important to demonstrate their dominance. He was right. The first Zephyrian dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their hulls glowing from re-entry heat. They were beautiful in a deadly way, sleek craft that moved with impossible grace despite their size. As predicted, the largest transport headed directly for Uluru, accompanied by 6 escort fighters. "Ghost 7, you have incoming," the command voice whispered in Marcus's ear. "Multiple targets, priority Alpha on the command vessel." The dropships landed with surprising gentleness, their advanced technology making the massive vessels touch down as softly as feathers. Immediately, ramps lowered and Zephyrian soldiers began emerging. Marcus studied them through his scope, noting their height, their 4 arms, their natural armor plating. Most importantly, he studied their movements and behavior patterns. The Zephyrians moved with the confidence of a species that had conquered 100 worlds. They didn't take cover, didn't scan for threats, didn't even post proper sentries. Why would they? Every intelligence report said humans were peaceful and feared war. This was just another routine conquest of another weak species. Admiral Vex Taylor himself emerged from the command dropship, his ornate armor gleaming in the Australian sun. He was surrounded by his honor guard, elite warriors who had fought in dozens of campaigns across the galaxy. They began setting up a command post with casual efficiency, unpacking equipment, and raising the crimson banner of the Zephyrian Empire. Target acquired. Marcus whispered into his comm unit. Range, 847 meters. Wind, minimal. Taking the shot in 3, 2. The bullet that ended Admiral Vextaler's 300-year military career was unremarkable by human standards. A simple .338 Lapua Magnum round, manufactured in a factory in Finland, loaded by hand in a facility in Colorado. It weighed less than an ounce and cost about $5 to produce. But that bullet had been fired by a man who could shoot the wings off a fly at 1,000 meters. Marcus had spent 20 years perfecting his craft, learning to account for wind, humidity, temperature, and a dozen other variables that could affect a long-range shot. He had practiced in deserts and jungles, mountains, and plains until his rifle was an extension of his own body. The bullet struck Admiral Vextaler in the head at 2,800 feet per second, penetrating his natural armor as if it were paper. The most feared military commander in the galaxy collapsed instantly, his brain destroyed before his nervous system could even register the impact. For a moment, the Zephyrian soldiers simply stared at their fallen leader in confusion. In 3,000 years of conquest, no primitive species had ever managed to kill an Imperial admiral. It was supposed to be impossible. Their armor was stronger than steel, their reflexes faster than any known species, their technology superior in every way. Captain Zekmorin knelt beside his admiral's body, his 4 hands checking for vital signs that would never return. Impossible, he whispered in the Zephyrian language. The humans have no weapons capable of penetrating Imperial armor. That's when the second shot rang out. This time it was Ghost 12, positioned in the Amazon rainforest, who sent a .50 caliber round through the head of a Zephyrian colonel at 1,200 meters. Then, Ghost 3 in the Himalayas took down a major at 950 meters. Within 60 seconds, 7 Zephyrian officers across the globe were dead, killed by invisible enemies they couldn't even locate. The surviving Zephyrians began to panic. They activated their energy shields and called for air support, but they were fighting an enemy unlike anything they had encountered in their 3 millennia of warfare. The snipers were too far away for their weapons to reach, and too well hidden to spot from the air. Marcus chambered another round and selected his next target. Through his scope, he watched the aliens scramble for cover behind their landing craft. Their movements were predictable. They had been trained to fight enemies who fought back with energy weapons and starships, not single bullets fired from impossible distances. Ghost 7, you are cleared to engage at will, came the command voice. All units execute Phase 2. Phase 2 was psychological warfare. The snipers had been instructed to take their time between shots, to let the Zephyrians think they were safe before striking again. Each shot had to count, both tactically and mentally. The goal wasn't just to kill enemy leaders. It was to destroy their confidence and make them afraid. Marcus waited 10 minutes before taking his next shot, watching the aliens through his scope as they tried to organize a response to a threat they couldn't understand. When he finally squeezed the trigger, the bullet found another officer who had foolishly exposed himself while trying to coordinate air support. All across Earth, the pattern repeated. Human snipers, hidden in terrain they knew better than any alien invader ever could, picked off Zephyrian leaders one by one. They used the oldest military principle in human history. When you can't win through strength, you win through superior position and patience. Captain Zekmorin crouched behind the smoldering wreckage of a Zephyrian transport, his communication device crackling with panicked reports from across the globe. In the span of 2 hours, the Empire had lost more officers to a primitive species than they had lost in their last 50 conquests combined. Sir, we have confirmation of sniper fire from 7 continents, reported Lieutenant Kexvor, his voice tight with disbelief. The humans are somehow targeting our command structure with pinpoint accuracy from distances our sensors can barely detect. Zekmorin's 4 hands trembled as he processed the impossible reports. The humans were using kinetic projectile weapons, simple bullets fired from chemical propulsion systems. By all Imperial knowledge, such primitive weapons should be useless against Zephyrian armor. Yet somehow, these bullets were penetrating their defenses and killing experienced soldiers. How are they doing this? He demanded into his comm unit. Our armor can withstand plasma bursts and energy weapons. How can simple metal projectiles cause such damage? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Velthurin, the expedition's xenobiologist, had been studying human physiology and psychology from intercepted medical data. Her voice crackled through the comm system with a mixture of fear and scientific fascination. Captain, I believe we've fundamentally misunderstood this species. Our intelligence focused on their peaceful diplomatic messages and their relatively simple technology. But we ignored their evolutionary history. Explain quickly, Doctor. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a world filled with dangerous predators. They developed the ability to track prey across vast distances with patience and precision that borders on the supernatural. Their snipers are the ultimate expression of this evolutionary trait. Individuals who can remain motionless for hours while calculating complex ballistic equations in their heads. Zekmorin ducked as another bullet sparked off the hole near his head. Somewhere in the Australian wilderness, a human was watching him through a scope, waiting for the perfect moment to end his life. But their weapons are primitive, he protested. They're individual weapons, yes. But Captain, they're not using just the weapons. They're using the entire planet. Every sniper is positioned in terrain they know intimately, using natural camouflage that makes them effectively invisible. They're fighting us the way their ancestors hunted mammoth, with infinite patience and perfect shots. Meanwhile, Marcus Reed had settled into the rhythm of war. He had been lying in the same position for 6 hours, moving only to adjust his aim or take a sip of water. His spotter Jake kept track of targets, wind conditions, and escape routes while Marcus focused on the zen-like state that all great snipers knew. Ghost 7, we have movement, Jake whispered. 3 Zephyrian soldiers setting up some kind of scanning equipment, probably trying to locate our position. Marcus studied the aliens through his scope. They were approximately 900 meters away, partially concealed behind their landed transport. The scanning device they were assembling looked sophisticated, probably capable of detecting the heat signature from his rifle barrel or the electromagnetic emissions from his scope's electronics. Time to go mobile, he murmured, but Jake shook his head. Negative. Command says hold position. They want the aliens to find some of our positions. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but didn't question orders. The overall strategy was beyond his pay grade. His job was to make shots and trust that smarter people than him had a plan. He chambered another round and watched the Zephyrians complete their scanner setup. The device activated with a soft blue glow, and immediately the aliens began pointing in Marcus's direction. They had found him, just as Command had apparently wanted. But instead of pulling back, Marcus lined up his shot on the scanner itself. The bullet destroyed the device in a shower of sparks, and the Zephyrians dove for cover. But now they knew approximately where he was, and Marcus could see them calling for air support. Within minutes, a Zephyrian fighter craft was screaming across the sky toward his position. Ghost 7, you have incoming, the command voice said calmly. Maintain position and prepare for Lazarus Protocol. Marcus had never heard of Lazarus Protocol, but he trusted the voice in his ear. The fighter craft approached fast and low, its energy weapons charging for a strafing run that would turn his rocky hiding place into molten slag. At the last second, Marcus heard Jake whisper, now, and roll hard to his left. The alien fighter's energy beam struck the exact spot where Marcus had been lying, but instead of vaporizing a human sniper, it hit something else entirely. Hidden among the rocks was a device that Marcus hadn't known was there, a sophisticated holographic projector that had been making his heat signature visible to alien scanners. As the fighter pilot realized he had been tricked, surface-to-air missiles launched from concealed positions around the outback. The Zephyrian craft, designed to fight other spacecraft in the vacuum of space, couldn't maneuver quickly enough in atmosphere. It exploded in a brilliant fireball that lit up the desert sky. Ghost 7, relocate to secondary position, came the command. Lazarus worked perfectly. All units, the aliens can be fooled by our technology just like we can fool theirs. As Marcus and Jake moved to their backup position, the truth became clear. Human military planners had been preparing for this moment since the first alien transmissions were detected. They had studied Zephyrian technology through telescope observations and signal analysis. They had identified weaknesses and developed countermeasures. Most importantly, they had realized that the aliens' greatest weakness was their arrogance. The Zephyrians had conquered so many worlds that they had forgotten how to fight an enemy who refused to play by their rules. Across the globe, the pattern repeated. Zephyrian forces would detect human positions using their advanced scanners, only to find that they were shooting at decoys and holograms. When they called in air support, hidden anti-aircraft batteries would destroy their fighters. When they tried to retreat to their ships, human snipers would pick off anyone who exposed themselves during the withdrawal. Captain Zek Morin watched his forces being systematically destroyed by an enemy he couldn't see or understand. The humans were fighting a war unlike anything in Imperial experience. They weren't trying to capture territory or destroy enemy fleets. They were simply killing his soldiers one by one, using the planet itself as their weapon. All units fall back to the ships, he finally ordered. We're pulling back to orbit and reassessing the situation. But even retreat proved dangerous. As Zephyrian soldiers ran for their transports, human snipers continued to pick off stragglers. Every movement was watched. Every mistake was punished with surgical precision. As the surviving Zephyrian forces lifted off from Earth's surface, they left behind something they had never lost before in 3,000 years of conquest: their confidence. For the first time in Imperial history, a primitive species had not only refused to surrender, but had actually inflicted casualties on the supposedly invincible Zephyrian military. In orbit, Captain Zek Morin stared down at the blue world that had just taught the Empire a lesson in humility. The planet looked peaceful from space, white clouds swirling over blue oceans and green continents. It was hard to believe that such a beautiful world contained predators capable of killing from impossible distances. But now the Empire faced a choice: retreat and lose face throughout the galaxy, or escalate the conflict and risk even greater losses against an enemy they clearly didn't understand. The captain made his decision and sent a message that would change the course of galactic history. Imperial Command, this is Captain Zek Morin. We need reinforcements. Many reinforcements. News of the Zephyrian defeat spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. On 100 worlds, conquered species whispered in amazement about the humans who had made the Empire bleed. In the halls of the Imperial Palace, emergency councils convened to discuss something that had never happened before: military failure against a primitive species. Emperor Zarkeleth himself took command of the situation. For 2,000 years, he had ruled the galaxy with absolute authority, his word law across countless star systems. The idea that a species of barely spacefaring primitives could humiliate his forces was not just unacceptable. It was impossible to comprehend. Bring me everything we have on these humans, he commanded his intelligence advisors. I want to know how they developed such advanced weapons while appearing so primitive. The reports that followed painted a confusing picture. Human technology was indeed primitive by Imperial standards. Their fastest ships could barely achieve faster-than-light travel. Their energy weapons were crude and inefficient. Their defensive systems were almost non-existent. But buried in the technical specifications was something the Empire had overlooked. Humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other. Their wars had driven technological innovation in directions the Zephyrians had never considered necessary. While the Empire had focused on conquering other species with superior technology, humans had learned to win wars through superior tactics, training, and individual skill. Your Imperial Majesty, reported General Vexthorn, the Empire's chief military strategist, the humans have developed what they call asymmetric warfare to a degree we've never encountered. They don't try to match our technological superiority. Instead, they exploit our weaknesses using methods we've never had to defend against. Emperor Zarkeleth's mandibles clicked with displeasure. What weaknesses? The Zephyrian military is perfect. That's exactly the weakness, Majesty. We've become so accustomed to technological superiority that we've forgotten how to fight an enemy who uses different tactics. Our soldiers expect to face energy weapons and force fields. They don't know how to defend against kinetic projectiles fired by hidden enemies. The Emperor stood from his crystalline throne, his massive form casting shadows across the throne room. Then, we'll teach them. Assemble the Fifth Fleet. 200 ships should be sufficient to teach these humans the price of defying the Empire. But, even as the Emperor spoke, something unprecedented was happening across the galaxy. The news of human resistance had reached the ears of other species that had been conquered by the Empire. On worlds where rebellion had been crushed decades ago, underground movements began to stir. On the mining world of Kepler, 442b, Kralik workers who had been enslaved for 50 years began to whisper among themselves. If humans could make the Empire bleed with primitive weapons, what could the Kralik accomplish with their natural strength and the mining equipment they operated every day? On the technological world of Proximus 7, Vorton engineers who had been forced to build Imperial weapons began to remember their own military traditions. They had been conquered through treachery, not military defeat. Their surrender had been negotiated to save civilian lives. But if humans were willing to fight impossible odds, perhaps it was time for the Vortons to reconsider their position. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity prepared for the storm they knew was coming. The successful defense against the first Zephyrian force had bought them time, but it had also ensured that the Empire would return in greater numbers. Marcus Reed sat in a military briefing room deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by 46 other snipers who had participated in the defense. They were an unlikely collection of heroes, farmers and hunters, soldiers and police officers, men and women who shared only one thing in common: the ability to make impossible shots when humanity needed them most. General Sarah Chun addressed the group with the kind of honesty that military leaders usually reserve for their closest advisors. "You've all seen the intelligence reports," she began. "The Empire is sending 200 ships this time. We estimate they'll have enough ground forces to occupy every major city on the planet simultaneously." The snipers listened in silence. They had bought humanity time with their skills, but time for what? Earth's industrial capacity couldn't produce enough weapons to match Imperial technology. Their space fleet was a handful of barely armed exploration vessels. In a conventional war, 200 Zephyrian ships could reduce human civilization to rubble in a matter of hours. But, General Chun continued, "We're not going to fight a conventional war. We're going to do something the Empire has never experienced in 3,000 years of conquest. We're going to teach them that some prices are too high to pay." The plan she outlined was insane by any reasonable military standard. Instead of trying to defend Earth directly, humanity would spread its forces across the entire solar system. Snipers would be positioned on asteroids, moons, and space stations. When the Imperial fleet arrived, they would find that every rock in the solar system potentially contained a human with a rifle. Marcus raised his hand. "Ma'am, how are we supposed to survive in space long enough to take shots? We're not astronauts." General Chun smiled grimly. "That's been taken care of. Our engineers have been working on powered armor suits designed specifically for sniper operations in vacuum. They'll keep you alive for up to 72 hours and won't interfere with your ability to make precise shots." The suits were unveiled the next day, and Marcus had to admit they were impressive. Sleek and form-fitting, they looked more like something from a science fiction movie than real military equipment. But the specifications were real enough. Full environmental protection, magnetic anchoring systems for zero-gravity shooting, and advanced optics that would allow accurate shots across distances measured in thousands of kilometers. "The suits are based on captured Imperial technology," explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the project's lead engineer. "We've reverse-engineered their materials and adapted their life support systems for our purposes. In many ways, these suits are superior to standard Imperial armor because they're designed for our specific mission requirements." As humanity prepared for the coming battle, something unexpected was happening throughout the Empire. The story of human resistance had spread beyond military channels. Civilian populations on conquered worlds were hearing about a species that had refused to surrender, even when facing impossible odds. The Empire's propaganda machine tried to suppress the stories, but information had a way of spreading through black market communication networks and underground resistance cells. The humans had done something that every conquered species had dreamed of. They had made the Empire afraid. On the slave world of Rigel 7, Nades rebels who had been hiding in the mountains for 20 years began planning new attacks against Imperial installations. On the fortress world of Vega Prime, even some Zephyrian soldiers began to question whether the Empire's conquests were as inevitable as they had been taught. But the most significant change was happening in the Imperial High Command itself. For 3,000 years, Zephyrian military doctrine had been based on the assumption of technological and tactical superiority. Their war plans were designed for quick, overwhelming victories against enemies who fought according to predictable patterns. Now they faced an enemy who broke every rule in the Imperial Military Handbook. Humans didn't mass their forces for easy targeting. They didn't try to protect strategic locations that could be bombed into submission. They simply disappeared into their environment and killed Imperial soldiers one by one, using weapons that were ancient by galactic standards, but wielded with skill that bordered on the supernatural. As the Fifth Fleet assembled in orbit around the Zephyrian homeworld, Emperor Zarkeleth issued a decree that would be remembered throughout galactic history. The human species will be completely exterminated. No prisoners will be taken. No mercy will be shown. They have chosen to defy the natural order of the galaxy, and they will pay the ultimate price for their arrogance. But even as the Emperor spoke those words, he couldn't shake the feeling that humanity had already won something more valuable than a single battle. They had proven that the Empire could be challenged, that the Zephyrian military machine was not invincible, and that even primitive weapons could be deadly in the right hands. The question now was whether 200 Imperial warships would be enough to crush the human spirit, or whether the Empire was about to learn that some enemies become more dangerous when you threaten to exterminate them completely. The Fifth Fleet emerged from hyperspace like a metal storm, 200 Zephyrian warships arranged in perfect battle formation. Emperor Zarkeleth himself commanded the flagship Eternal Dominion, determined to personally oversee the extermination of the species that had dared to humiliate his empire. But as the fleet sensors scanned the Sol system, they found something completely unexpected. It was empty. "Where are their defensive fleets?" demanded the Emperor, his four eyes scanning the tactical displays. "Where are their orbital stations and weapon platforms?" Admiral Vextherin, who had replaced the deceased Admiral Vextiller, studied the sensor readings with growing confusion. Majesty were detecting minimal activity around their homeworld. A few civilian stations, some communication satellites, but no military presence worth mentioning. "They're hiding," the Emperor concluded. "Scan every asteroid, every moon, every piece of debris in this system. The humans are somewhere, waiting to ambush us with their primitive projectile weapons." It took 6 hours of intensive scanning before the fleet sensors began detecting the truth. Humans were indeed spread throughout the solar system, but not in the way anyone had expected. Individual life signs appeared on asteroids in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. Single heat signatures were detected on the moons of Saturn and Jupiter. Tiny installations were discovered in the rings of the outer planets. Impossible, whispered Admiral Vexturon. They positioned individual soldiers throughout their entire star system. There must be thousands of them, each one hidden in perfect cover. Emperor Zarkeleth's mandibles clicked with annoyance. Individual soldiers cannot threaten a fleet of 200 warships. Order all vessels to begin systematic bombardment of every detected position. As the Imperial fleet began its attack, Marcus Reed floated in the asteroid belt, anchored to a rock barely larger than a house. His new armor suit was working perfectly, keeping him alive in the vacuum of space while providing targeting data for a shot that would have been impossible with traditional equipment. Through his scope, he could see the massive Imperial flagship nearly 3,000 kilometers away. At that distance, the ship looked like a bright star against the black of space, but his suit's advanced optics magnified it into perfect clarity. He could see the bridge section, the weapon emplacements, even individual windows where alien officers might be standing. "Ghost 7, you are cleared for the opening shot," came the voice in his comm system. "All units, remember patience and precision. Make every shot count." Marcus controlled his breathing and adjusted his aim for the zero-gravity environment. The bullet he was about to fire had been specially modified for space combat, a depleted uranium penetrator designed to punch through Imperial hull armor at extreme range. The physics were complicated, but the principle was simple. Hit them where they don't expect to be hit. He squeezed the trigger, and the bullet streaked across space at nearly 3 times the velocity it would have achieved in atmosphere. Without air resistance to slow it down, the projectile maintained its speed across the vast distance to the Imperial flagship. The bullet struck the Eternal Dominion exactly where Marcus had aimed, at the base of a sensor array that intelligence had identified as crucial for fleet coordination. The array exploded in a shower of sparks and debris, temporarily blinding the flagship's ability to coordinate the fleet's movements. Across the solar system, similar shots rang out. Human snipers hidden on asteroids and moons began targeting the Imperial fleet's most vulnerable systems. They couldn't destroy the massive ships with individual bullets, but they could disable sensors, communication arrays, and weapon targeting systems. The Zephyrian response was immediate and overwhelming. Plasma cannons that could level mountains turned space rocks into clouds of vapor. Energy beams swept through asteroid fields, vaporizing anything that might conceivably hide a human sniper. The sheer firepower was awesome to behold. But the humans had learned from their first encounter with Imperial forces. For every real sniper position, there are dozens of decoys and false signals. Heat sources, electromagnetic emissions, and even holographic projectors made it appear as if humans were hiding everywhere throughout the system. Emperor Zarkeleth watched his fleet waste enormous amounts of ammunition, destroying empty rocks and sensor ghosts. "This is madness," he roared. "How many of them are there?" "Sensors indicate approximately 2,000 individual positions, Majesty," reported Admiral Vextherin. "But we've already destroyed nearly 1,000 targets without confirming any actual kills." "Then destroy everything," the Emperor commanded. "Every asteroid, every moon, every piece of debris. I want this entire system sterilized." As the Imperial fleet began systematically destroying everything in the Sol system, something unprecedented happened throughout the galaxy. On 50 worlds, resistance movements that had been dormant for decades suddenly erupted into open rebellion. The sight of humans forcing the mighty Fifth Fleet to waste its ammunition shooting at rocks had inspired every conquered species to remember their own dreams of freedom. The Kralik miners on Kepler 442 b seized the orbital mining platforms and declared independence. The Vorten engineers on Proxima 7 activated hidden weapons they had been secretly building for 50 years. Even some Zephyrian colonial governments faced revolts as local populations realized that the Empire was not as invincible as it claimed. But the most significant rebellion was happening where no one expected it, within the Imperial fleet itself. On the heavy cruiser Blood of Conquest, Captain Morkelvin received orders to begin bombarding Earth's major population centers as a demonstration of Imperial power. "Sir," reported his weapons officer, "are you certain about these orders? Our intelligence indicates the human population centers contain no military targets." Captain Morkelvin stared at the blue world on his view screen. In his 300 years of military service, he had conquered 17 worlds for the Empire. But this was different. The humans had fought back not with superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but with individual courage and skill that reminded him of the ancient Zephyrian warrior traditions. "Captain," the weapons officer asked again. Morkelvin made a decision that would cost him his life, but save his honor. "Negative. I will not order bombardment of civilian populations. The humans have fought honorably according to their own warrior traditions. They deserve the same respect we would show any worthy enemy." Within minutes, Captain Morkelvin was executed for insubordination, but his words had been broadcast throughout the fleet. Other Zephyrian officers began to question their orders. Some refused outright to participate in the bombardment of civilian targets. A few even turned their weapons on Imperial ships that were preparing to destroy Earth cities. Meanwhile, Marcus Reed was preparing for what he knew would be his final shot. His asteroid had been detected by Imperial sensors, and he could see fighters approaching to finish him off. But he still had one bullet left, and he intended to make it count. Through his scope, he could see Emperor Zarkeleth himself standing on the bridge of the flagship, apparently giving orders to his staff. The range was extreme, nearly 5,000 kilometers, but Marcus had made impossible shots before. He whispered a prayer to whatever gods protected snipers and pulled the trigger. The bullet crossed the void of space in perfect silence, following a trajectory calculated by the most advanced computers humanity had ever built. It struck the bridge of the eternal dominion and penetrated the supposedly impenetrable transparent aluminum viewport. Emperor Zarkeleth, ruler of 1,000 worlds and conqueror of 100 species, died instantly as the bullet found his target. The emperor who had declared humanity would be exterminated was killed by a human farmer from Montana, using a rifle his grandfather might have recognized. With their emperor dead and their fleet in chaos, the Zephyrian invasion collapsed. Some ships fled immediately. Others tried to continue the fight, but found themselves facing not just human resistance, but rebellions throughout their own ranks. Within hours, the mighty Fifth Fleet was scattered across the galaxy, carrying news of an unprecedented defeat. On Earth, humanity emerged from their shelters to find their sky clear of enemy ships. They had won not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple principle that had guided human warriors since the beginning of time. When fighting for your home and family, surrender is never an option. The Galactic Empire still existed, but it was forever changed. 50 worlds had declared independence. Conquered species throughout the galaxy were demanding their freedom. And somewhere in the outer rim, on a small blue planet, lived a species that had proven the Empire was not invincible. Marcus Reed's final shot had not just killed an emperor. It had shattered the myth of imperial invincibility and shown the galaxy that even the mightiest empire could be brought down by individuals with the courage to fight back. The age of Zephyrian dominance was over. The age of galactic freedom had begun, and it had all started with a human sniper who refused to miss when it mattered most.